Great, thanks, Caleb. So we're looking this morning at the question, or this afternoon now, who is Jesus? If you're familiar with Christianity at all, you'll know this is a question that you have to wrestle with at some point. If you're looking into Christianity, this is the founding question that matters. Because for a religion founded on the claims of Jesus, it's essential that we wrestle with the question, who is Jesus? Rigorous debates about the incompatibility of science and the ethics and morality of Christianity are important, as is big questions, philosophical questions like the problem of evil. In fact, many of them are important issues to think about. But when it comes to Christianity, it comes to Jesus. What do you make of Jesus? Who is he? I wonder, how would you answer that question? Perhaps you would suggest he's a good person. Someone who criticised the abuse of power, who stuck up for the weak and the vulnerable in society, who called out oppressive structures and systems, a kind of modern day Robin Hood, old day Robin Hood. Maybe you'd say he's a good teacher, a bit more than just a good person, a bit more than someone just willing to do nice deeds. Maybe his teaching on love really appeals. You like all the golden rule, the treat others as you wish to be treated. You enjoy the parable of the Good Samaritan about loving those that are different from you. And you find it really refreshing and compassionate after all the kind of nastiness of the Old Testament, perhaps. Maybe you're willing to even extend that a bit further. Jesus isn't just a good teacher. Maybe he's a prophet. You look at him, a messenger from God, that is, and you think, this guy's got some kind of otherworldly message or power. He can't just be a good teacher. It's unique what he was able to do. Though you might disagree on which God he was a prophet for. Or you might not be positive at all. You think the guy was a fraud. Did Jesus even exist? You think, did the historical Jesus actually matter? If he did, you're convinced he can't be a good person. All the claims of miracles and teaching, it's just fakery passed off on a naive and suspicious population. He exploited them for his own gain and got what he deserved, and Christians are foolish to believe in him. Maybe you've got a little bit more sympathy than that. You don't think Jesus was good. You don't think he had a good function, but nor do you think he's fully bad. Some would put it this way: he was ill, deluded, mentally unwell. He was used by people around him and didn't know what he was doing. Instead, he was the kind of fake basis for a deceptive religion that the people used for their own benefit. These aren't inconsequential matters or questions, are they? How we answer this question, who is Jesus, how we respond to some of those accusations, has profound implications for how we react to Christianity, other religions, and therefore how we build our lives and the decisions we make of them. Let me run back through those and give you some examples. That if Jesus was just a good person, then he's not worth following and building a life around, is he? He's not worth worshipping as Christians do. He might be worth looking up to, like a kind of Mother Teresa or Gandhi type figure, someone who we should seek to emulate. But he's not more than that. Besides, though, if he's just a good person, then I think actually you have to say he's not a good person at all. He's a prolific liar and fraud, given the claims he makes. One cannot go around claiming to be the Son of God, relying on the support and finances of others, and passing off big miracles to win over crowds and be a good person. No, that's fraud and deception at the highest level. Likewise, if he's a good teacher, then we can listen to some of what he has to say. But like with all teachers, there'll be things we disagree with or want to challenge or don't want to listen to. We can then pick and choose what we like. The factual truth of what he said and what he claims to be doesn't matter anymore. He becomes just another mythical figure like Peter Pan. We end up distorting his character and simply making him whoever we want to be, a kind of totem figure for our own ends. If he's a prophet, then we might want to listen to what he says a bit more carefully, if he is a messenger from God. But not more than that. He's not worth worship. He's not the hero. He's not the center of the story like Christians claim he is. He's just a messenger for someone bigger and better. And more negatively, if he's a fraud and a fake, then he ought to be rejected, not heralded, not celebrated. If he was a fraud and a fake, we should oppose him and his supporters, Christians, everywhere we see them, for they're wasting their time, wasting other people's times and exploiting them. And if he's ill and unwell, well, we ought to pity him, surely. He was just a deluded man who was used by those around him and didn't have a clue what was going on. That's certainly not the way you want to build your life. That's certainly not the good foundation for a religion, is it? So, how we answer the question, who is Jesus, determines the way that we respond to him and to Christianity. If any one of those options that we've just mentioned are true, then Christians are wasting their time, and you ought to pity them, pity us. C.S. Lewis, a famous writer from the last centuries, puts it this way: a man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. And whilst it's an important question, it's important to recognise this isn't a new question. It can be very easy to sit here, can't it, in our 21st century Western academic university ivory towers and speak disparagingly of all those before us. We're more superior now. We are intellectually better. We have better ethics and morals now than those that came before us. Everyone else back then was just deceived, and Christians are just standing in that long tradition of deception. And yet, funnily enough, this is a question, who is Jesus, that he faces throughout his entire life. Take any one of the Gospels, which are the biographies of Jesus' life, and you'll find people testing him, scrutinizing him, challenging him, basically asking to his face, who are you? I've chosen to look at Mark today, the book of Mark, which talks through Jesus' life. And you see this time and time again. Let's go with the prophet example first. There are countless times people mistake Jesus for a prophet. Elijah particularly, who is kind of the most famous of the Jewish prophets. Listen to this bit from the book of Mark. King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him. Others said, he is Elijah, and still others claimed, he is like a prophet of long ago. See, back in the first century, when Jesus was on the scene, people are asking these questions. Is he a prophet? Perhaps. Or take the claim he's a good person. Another part of Mark says this: as Jesus started on his way, a man ran up to him and fell on his knees before him. Good teacher, he asked him, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus, though, ups the stakes. I'm not just a good teacher, he says. Why do you call me good? Jesus answered, no one is good except God alone. Jesus pushes back at the man's claim and ups the stakes. Only God is good. So I'm either good and I'm God, or I'm not God and I'm not good. The crowds that Jesus interacts with in his day and age too are asking these questions and creating quite a lot of pressure for him. When Jesus goes around preaching in his villages where he grew up, the crowds say this: where did this man get these things? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. You see, just as we get offended now by this question, who is Jesus? How can Jesus claim to be all these things? That was happening then. They recognize that Jesus is something else. He's these remarkable miracles he's performing, these wisdom. How can Jesus be these things, they say, though? We grew up with him. We know his family. He's just a carpenter. And take it further, that claim about him being mentally unwell, his own family say he's out of his mind. Listen to this bit. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. Or finally, that the fake, fraud, bad guy character assassination is taken to a whole new level by the religious leaders of the day. They claim he's possessed by evil spirits, the epitome of bad and evil himself. They say he is possessed by Beelzebul, by the prince of demons. He is driving out demons. You see, note all these different questions. They were the same then as they are now. Who is Jesus? And what they decided mattered just as what we decide matters, because it changes how they respond to Jesus. You see, some people thought he was just good, and they followed him around. They picked up the kind of breadcrumbs that he left behind, all the nice little trinkets and bits, but they kept their distance. They didn't want to take his claims too seriously. They didn't want to really believe what he said, because that would mean they have to change their life. Others don't want to believe him. Others don't believe him, and so they spend their life opposing him. They reject him out of fear that their lives would have to dramatically change, that their influence, etc., would change. And eventually they kill him. That's how far their opposition goes to him. But there are another group. Some trust him. Some take these claims. They investigate them. They test them. And they commit their lives to him. And so that's the question now. What are those claims? If he's not those 5 categories that I kind of laid out, who does Jesus claim to be? Who do Christians think he is? It's an important question. It's a common question. And yet it's an answerable question. The Bible, which I think you've spoken about already in one of these talks, answers this question. Jesus says this about himself in Mark chapter 10, if you want to go and investigate it later. He says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Who is Jesus? Well, I think that small verse that I just read gives us 3 key things about who Jesus claims to be. Firstly, he's the Son of Man. What does that mean? The Son of Man was a title that Jesus claimed for himself, which refers back to an Old Testament vision given to a prophet, Daniel. The Son of Man vision is described like this. "In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, that is God, and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." The Son of Man in this image is a divine yet human heavenly being, both God and man. He's both fully like us in our humanity and yet fully different in his divinity. He's given power and authority, glory and sovereign power. He is worshipped by nations of every language and every tribe. His kingdom will never pass away. He is one ruler who will not fall apart, whose election term will not come to an end, who won't be deposed in a coup. The Bible says that he rules the universe, this Son of Man figure, that all things have been created through him and for him. So when Jesus speaks as the Son of Man, which he does 17 times across the book of Mark, he is invoking this image of heavenly rule and authority. He is claiming to be that figure. But what sort of ruler is he? How does he use this unmatched authority and power? And here's our second point. He's the Son of Man, but the Son of Man came to serve, not to be served. Power in our day and age is a deeply problematic concept, isn't it? It's synonymous with oppression and injustice, undeserved inequality and privilege. Hence, we've got all this talk about subverting power systems and structures, speaking truth to power, and taking power from those that traditionally held it and giving it to those who traditionally haven't. And with good reason, right? Life has taught us that power is abused and manipulated. We're taught not to trust it. Power has been unfair and abusive and unjust for so many people. You can take the trite example, the smallest of things, from an unfair mark from your lecture on a paper to a horrific refereeing decision in a football match. You see power being abused and manipulated or just not carried out properly in those small, silly examples. But more poignantly, we see it in our world, don't we? In the big questions, the way that the financial system makes some much richer at the expense of the poor, and the corruption and decadence of the system leads to a financial crash, as it did in 2008. Or the way that the world works currently is causing such havoc and devastation to our environment. Or the way that those placed in positions of care and authority, carers, policemen, abuse those they're meant to protect. You may have heard the Lord Acton quote, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." Seems wise, doesn't it? Even if you have a fairly positive view of power, we still want checks and balances, as they're rooted into our constitution, to prevent a power being manipulated or abused, to prevent people from doing evil with it. So how can we expect to receive the claim of Jesus with any sort of positivity? Well, it comes down to the reason why he came and the reason for what he uses his power. He came to serve. Unlike his followers, who in that little story that I read out to you were arguing and disagreeing with each other over who is the most important, who gets the best position, who deserves the most praise and glory. Jesus is not concerned with others serving him. He's concerned with serving others. And as you read through the Gospels, the biographies of Jesus' life, the book of Mark, as I'm using today, this claim stacks up. He's not just another hypocrite saying one thing and doing another. A quick read through the book of Mark would reveal a man who spends his life healing the sick and the needy, who associates with those no one else is willing to go near, who gives his time to those that have been cut off, marginalized, and abused, who challenges the religious leaders and the Roman leaders for their failure to use power correctly. He even serves those who later go on to have him killed. And this is where our third point comes in. He's the Son of Man who came to serve. And his ultimate act of service was to give his life. He gives his life as a ransom for many. This is where we touch upon the big issue at play in the Bible. In the meta-narrative, the big story of the Bible, humanity was created by God, for a relationship with God, to know him, love him, enjoy him. But right back at the beginning, we decided to reject him, to know and love and trust and enjoy other things. The Bible says we worshipped created things rather than the creator, the one that made them. This is called sin. And the Bible kind of speaks about it in a kind of there's a really helpful image I find of a pot speaking back to its potter, this pathetic little piece of clay who would have nothing if it was not for the potter that made him, getting angry and rebelling against the one that made him, the one that gave it life and shape and form. And this caused a devastating fracture in the world. Humanity, through its own rejection of God, was cut off from the source of all that is good in the world. It's cut off from the source of life, and therefore subject to death as the natural consequence. There's a gap between God and humanity. Because God is just, he is righteously just. He cannot tolerate what is wrong. And so humanity cannot come near God, for we are not just. And so the gap has to be closed. And if it is to be closed, it can only be done by God approaching humanity, dealing with their sin and the punishment of death that comes with it. And this is where Jesus comes in. This is his act of service. If God is to be just, there must be someone who takes the punishment for human sin, who deals with that problem. There must be a death. That's who Jesus is. The Son of Man who comes to serve by giving his life as a ransom for many. To pay the price for humanity's rejection of God, he paid the ransom to buy us back, to bridge that gap. Another part of the Bible says this: he suffered death so that by the grace or the gift of God, he might taste death for everyone. So who is Jesus? Well, he claims to be the Son of Man, the one with all heavenly authority, but he came to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. What do you make of these claims? Who is Jesus? It matters, doesn't it? One writer says this: Christ either deceived mankind by conscious fraud, or he was himself deluded and self-deceived, or he was divine. There is no getting out of this trilemma. They're the options before us this morning. He's either the Son of Man that gives his life to bridge the gap and bring salvation, or he is not. One option makes him the one who's worth devoting your life to. The other makes him a deceptive fraud who should be run away from. We've only been able to touch upon one aspect of Jesus' character, identity, and claims this morning. There are many more. One writer says, the event of Jesus Christ is far too great to be caught and held in one interpretation and one only. And so I'm sure the CU would love to chat to you more about who Jesus claims to be. Why not go away and read the book of Mark, the biography that I've been looking at? I'm sure they would be happy to post you a copy, chat to you, Zoom call you. You can Google it and find it online and read it for free. Test these claims, see who Jesus claims to be, see the way that the people of the day ask these same questions. But as we finish, whilst it's right for us to question Jesus, who is he? Do the claims stack up? Jesus has got a question for us. Who do you say I am? He asks. Is he the one who saves? Is he the one in whom you trust to be your ransom? For Jesus says no one else can bridge that gap but him. He claims to be the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. So to reject him is to reject the Son of Man, the servant king of all. To reject him is to reject the only one able to save us from death. So who do you say Jesus is? Over to questions now, I think, Caleb.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for the wonderful talk. Really get us thinking. So I'm so glad we are having some questions from the Slido. And if you haven't asked your question, you can still type a question now. And there isn't a lot of questions, so you'll probably get me helping you ask the question. So yeah, the first question we have is, how do we as people from the 21st century relate to someone who lived so long ago?
Good question. I think what I was saying about the kind of we can sit here in our kind of Western ivory tower, can't we, particularly in the university context, and think people back then were just silly. Certainly from chatting to some of my mates, that's the overwhelming feeling. But I think one of the things that convinces me we can relate to them is, as I said, you read through the biography, the book, and you will see that people are actually far more similar to us now than we think. They ask the same questions, they have the same concerns. I'm not convinced humanity has changed that much in our intrinsic nature, whilst the context and the culture might change. I don't know if that's helpful. Feel free to come back if not.
Yeah, we'll also have a breakout room session after the Q&A and after a kind of like notice. And if you want to talk to Tom about the questions, you can also do so. Okay, and we will have another question about the Gospel of Mark. So this person asks, how can we trust the biography of Jesus, I assume, of the book of Mark?
Yeah, it's a good question. As I said, I think in my talk, you guys have already looked at that question. I would recommend going away and having a look at that video, but rather than copying out completely and saying that, I think the book of Mark and the other Gospels of Jesus have overwhelming evidence historically. If you compare them to other kind of manuscripts of the time, there are thousands upon thousands, partly in thanks to something called the Dead Sea Scrolls, which you can read about a bit more if you want to, which give us so many copies of these biographies, and the overwhelming evidence shows that they all match up. There's no kind of discrepancies. This isn't something that's been made up later on. The time in which they were written is also astonishingly close to the actual events, far more so than, say, other manuscripts or historical documents at the time. I think I'm right in saying the evidence that Jesus existed and lived and that events happened are more clear than the existence of Caesar. There's overwhelming historical evidence out there that backs up that these are worth investigating at least and taking on face value.
Thanks for your answer. And then someone else asked about sacrifice. So probably he comes at a point knowing that Jesus died. So why did there need to be a sacrifice? And the other question is, why is the punishment for sin death?
So it was the first question, why does there need to be a sacrifice?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Why does there need to be a death? I think I'll do first. I think it goes back to what I was saying about what sin is. Sin is rejecting the one that gives life. It is rejecting the creator. And so partly punishment, but partly natural consequence. You reject what gives life. Death is the result. And so right back from the start, that's always been the penalty for sin as a default idea. And so now coming into the second question, why does Jesus need to be a sacrifice? Why does there need to be a death? Well, for justice to happen, I don't think we'd be happy with the idea of crimes being unpunished. That we would say we wouldn't live in an unjust society if people would just go away and get away with murder and all these sorts of things. And God is far more just than we are, as much as we like to think we are just. God is the embodiment of justice, and therefore he cannot tolerate wrongdoing. He cannot tolerate crimes against himself, against other people. And so he cannot just kind of turn a blind eye to all the evil that humanity has done. Something's got to happen that takes the punishment for that evil. And therefore that is the sacrifice that Christ does, makes for us.
Thank you. And we also have other questions. So how can Jesus be both man and God?
Yeah, great question. And this touches upon the kind of big idea of the Trinity in Christian thought. The Bible often presents two ideas that we would naturally want to kind of disagree with or say only one can be true, and yet it holds both those things and says they're both true simultaneously. Jesus is both fully God and fully man as one of them. And whilst it's much easier to kind of try and find a way around that, I think if we take the Bible at its word, we take it as true, we have to find a way of wrestling with those two things together. So that's kind of what I say at a kind of philosophical level. How can Jesus be both fully God and fully man? The virgin birth comes in here. Christ is both born of woman, but also conceived of by God, both fully God and fully man in that sense. Then it's a very tricky issue. We Christians do wrestle with this too. We're not immune to how odd that sounds, but happy to chat more too afterwards.
And I think it's the last question in the Slido. If you have any other questions, you can feel free to ask. Isn't God an absolute power? Will God abuse people? I think that's quite a challenging question.
Sorry, say that again.
Isn't God an absolute power? I think when you quote it, someone saying absolute power would lead to absolute corruption.
Yes.
And will God abuse people?
Yes, it's a good question. This is why it's crucial that we see that Jesus came to serve, because we see that son of mine idea. We see that he has absolute power, and our natural instinct is to think absolute power, well, that corrupts absolutely. That's terrible. That leads to dictators. That leads to abuse and manipulation. But I would encourage you, go away and read the book of Mark. You see this man who has power to calm the wind and the waves, the power over sickness and death. He has that absolute power, and yet he never abuses or manipulates people. He never corrupts others. He loves, cares, and gives himself for them, serving them completely. And so if Jesus comes to show us God, Jesus shows us that God does not abuse and manipulate his power, but uses it more perfectly than anything we can imagine. And so that's where my kind of hope is, that actually there is a kind of redeeming power at work, far from our experience of dirty and manipulative power that we see day to day.
Thank you. Another question showed up. It's actually 3 questions in
Oh, wow.
1 question. I think it will be good if you can answer one by one, but I would just say the 3 questions first, in case, I don't know if they are that kind of linked together, but they are a little bit. So how do you know Jesus wasn't just a prophet? Couldn't the Bible have been changed? Or how do we know these miracles he did were real?
Cool. So was Jesus a prophet? How do we know the Bible hasn't changed? And remind me the third one.
How do we know these miracles he did were real?
Okay.
So maybe we can answer the first one first.
Yeah, great.
Makes sense. How do you know Jesus wasn't just a prophet?
Yeah. So Jesus never claims to be just a prophet. All the other prophets in the Bible recognize their role as such. Jesus, by claiming to be the Son of Man, claims something far greater. He is claiming to be the Son of God. And if you look at the way that he does his miracles, etc., he is not doing so. He has that power, and the Bible speaks about him having that power. Whereas for prophets, that power comes externally, given by God as a gift. So I think the kind of manifestation of what Jesus does and how he does it shows that he is more than just a prophet, and the way that his claims are also as such. And I think people recognize that at the time. So even though there's this kind of wrestle of, is he Elijah? Is he one of these other things? That there's a kind of tension and unease about that idea that they know that's not quite true. This is a guy who is different. So right at the beginning of Mark in chapter 2, Jesus comes on the scene and people are like, who is this guy? He teaches with a new authority. He's bringing a new thing. He is different from what's come before and the prophets that have come before. So for those reasons, I'd say it's clear that Jesus isn't just a prophet. Second question was, how does the Bible change, or how do we know it hasn't?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it goes back to the manuscripts thing I was talking about. We can collect all the kind of copies of the Gospels in their kind of original form and compare them to one another to see the different changes. But they're just a very, very few, if any at all. And the Bible's very clear, is very honest about this. So if you open up a Bible, there will be like footnotes in the bottom of the page, and there'll be kind of, well, the original manuscripts say this, but we found some others and they say this. They're quite honest about the differences that there may be. Those small ones do exist. But yeah, there's thousands and thousands of manuscripts, and you can compare them all. And you can see that the Bibles that we have now in modern English compare pretty well to the original Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic in which the original Bible was written. So it's just a case of testing up the evidence and seeing that what we've got now matches what was originally written down.
And how do we know these miracles he did were real?
Yeah, how do we know that? Yeah, again, I think it's very easy, very, very easy to be like, I wasn't there, I didn't see it. If I'd seen it, I would be able to believe it. But those people back then, they didn't know much about science, they didn't know much about this. They were silly and foolish. And so it was easy for them to believe in miracles. I think that's the easy way out, but I don't think that's a fair way out, and I don't think that treats the sources of the Bible and the people with any kind of integrity or degree of intellectual curiosity. Take for one example, Jesus calming the wind and the waves. His disciples, the followers, are in a furious storm, and the lake is threatening to drown them. These men are terrified. Now, these are fishermen. They spend their lives on the water. They would be in storms like similar storms or not quite so bad regularly, and they would know if there's no fakery kind of going on there. The evidence of the storm and their fear towards it shows that the kind of storm's a real thing, and Jesus deals with that. And they're terrified by the fact that he can do that, because it's unlike anything they've ever seen before. And that's just one example. There's many different examples of the way that the crowd responds to miracles that Jesus does that convince me that they're natural reactions to what you'd expect to see if you saw a miracle there and then. Yeah, but I think that's a good question. The Bible might be unchanged. It might be real, so to speak, but why don't we just treat it like myth, like we would with kind of some of the ancient Greek writings? And I think you've got to get into the text, got to have a look at these stories, test them, see what the reactions are, see how people respond. And I think that tends to stack up. I guess another example for that would be the resurrection, Jesus coming back to life. I think the evidence that happened is incredibly strong, because of the way that his disciples react, because of the way the religious leaders react to this event. I think they are fair representations of what you'd expect in a circumstance like that. Again, happy to chat more in breakout rooms afterwards.
Thank you, Tom. I think every question is asked, and thank you for all your questions.